Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Drabinski with Ideas on Fire, and I'm excited that you're joining us for today's webinar, Resisting Academic Busyness and Taking Weekends Off. I know you're all very busy, speaking of busyness, so thank you for joining us today. What I will try to talk you out of over the next 30 to 40 minutes is the idea that you're as busy as you think you are. I think there's a big call. It's almost a status symbol to be busy. And I think it's a good idea to reflect on whether or not that busyness is something that we really need to value. So the way this webinar will work is in a second, I will disappear from the screen, goodbye, and pull up the PowerPoint slides. I'll work my way through the slides. If you have questions or things you want to discuss after the webinar, type them in that box that's right down there, or you can type it in the Ask a Question section of Crowdcast. So, and then when I come back, we can talk about what y'all want to talk about. So again, thank you for joining us, and let's move to the slides. I'll see you soon. All right. So let me pull up the slideshow. Okay, so as I said, resisting academic busyness and taking weekends off is our topic today. So on tap, we're going to talk about busyness and why it's a problem. Then we'll discuss some ways to resist the peer pressure to always be busy, which I think is especially strong in academia. And then we'll talk about how to frame what we have to do in a way that isn't about busyness. So I'm going to ask us to do some things that I don't like to do, but it's worth the effort. Learning how to account for our time, see where it goes. Are we as busy as we think? Take a minute to clarify our goals, to think about what we do and don't want to do with all this time. And then move on to something that I hold very dear, which is the idea of protecting your weekend at all costs. People have, as I will say in this webinar, people have fought and died for our right to the weekend. And I think it's important that we honor that sacrifice and learn to actually take time away from work. But what if I'm really busy? That's the last thing we'll discuss today, because I know that's what a lot of us will think, especially at this time of year. I can't possibly preserve my weekends because right now I'm really, really busy. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then I'll suggest some future resources from Ideas on Fire that can help you think about taking breaks in your everyday and finding ways to escape the sense of busy. All right, so let's talk about busyness. So busyness, the way that we're going to use it in today's webinar, is that sense that there's so much to do and so little time, right? So I don't know about you, but I have a to-do list that's pages long. And if I do something that's not on the to-do list, I go write it on there just so I can check it off. But I have a lot to do. Right now I'm balancing grading, students need to meet, planning for summer school, my own research and writing. There's a lot going on. So there's something real about busyness, that sense that there's so much to do and so little time. But sometimes busyness is just about looking busy. I know that when my chair walks by my office, the last thing I want her to see is me reloading cat pictures on Facebook, right? I want to look busy. I want there's a kind of Potemkin village aspect to busyness, right? Making people think that we're working and making ourselves feel like we're working, because that call to productivity is really important for a lot of us. So looking busy is part of busyness. And then there's what I think is at the core of a lot of academic busyness, the sense that we have to keep up with everyone else's busy. If your colleagues are too busy to meet, if you have time to meet, it might leave you with some questions. Am I doing enough? So that stress to keep up with everyone else's busy sometimes replaces the reality, and we can feel busy even when we're not. So what's wrong with busy? I think there are a few things that constant busyness leads to. One is burnout, that sense that I just don't want to do it. And we all know the feeling. I have a stack of papers to grade right now, and I don't even want to get started, because once I start, I know I'm going to have to do it. So I feel busy because I have a lot of grading to do, but I'm so burned out by a semester of busyness that I can barely get started. So that's one of the big issues with busyness, is burnout. The second is fatigue. I think we really tire ourselves out when we don't take breaks, when we don't take downtime to just be bored, when we don't schedule in time to reload cat pictures on Facebook. That's an important part of my life. And when we're too busy to do it, when we get really tired, and I think that that hurts our sense of efficacy in the world. And then the next two things I want to talk about are productivity. One I have on this slide is excess productivity. I think the call to always be being productive is really dangerous, especially for academics. There's a way that our work is our life, and I know this extremely well, right? So like I ride a bicycle to get around for work all the time. I write about what I see. That's a blog in my mind. Someday it's a book. Like I can't even just ride a bike. I've got to make it productive. And that's what I mean by excess productivity, that sometimes we're producing where we don't need to. And it would be better to have some part of life that we're not always making something happen. I think for academics, it can be helpful to remember this tip, especially as sort of critical academics, that the call to be always productive is one of the biggest dangers of capitalism, and resisting that call can be a way of resisting capital. So if you need a way to think about it in academic terms, there you go. That's one way to think about the importance of decreasing that busy. If we do care about productivity, I think that busyness actually leads to a decline in productivity. When we're not, when we set aside, say, I have so much to do, I'm going to work for 8 hours on this project, we can spend 7 hours of that avoiding the project, right? There's a way that being so busy burns us out in a way that we can't even get done the basic things that we need to get done. And all of this leads to a work-life out of balance. I don't really believe that a work-life balance is something that we necessarily achieve, but I do think that a life that is all about work can leave us very out of balance in terms of the other parts that make us human, the parts that of feeding ourselves, of nourishing ourselves with exercise, with meditation, with hobbies, with sitting around doing nothing. Whatever it is that makes us human can be lost when we're so overwhelmed with the busy. So I think that's why it's important to talk about this really frankly in today's webinar. All right, so now I want to go into some techniques for dealing with that sense of busyness. And first I want to talk about the importance of resisting peer pressure. The peer pressure to stay busy, I think, for a lot of us started in college when we had so much homework and we were always working on papers and always working. And when we get to graduate school, that's amped up, right? Because graduate school is all the A+ students from all the colleges together, right? And everyone is extremely productive. That's how they made it there. And so there's a lot of pressure from other people to always be busy, because it becomes this kind of, as I say here, busyness as a status. So these old habits die really hard, the sense that you've always got to be working. I've been out of graduate school for almost 15 years, and it's only the last couple of years that I figured out how to resist that peer pressure and actually take time off. There's also the pressure of competition and the very real pressure of your career trajectory. So if you are on the tenure track, it can feel like I'm not busy because I'm trying to look busy. I'm busy because if I don't get a book out, I'm not going to keep my job. So it's a really very real sensation, but there's also the fact that there is time enough to do that work. And a lot of it is about how we organize our time. And we'll do that work better if we carve out some mental space from that sense of busyness. So I want to talk here about some ways of resisting the peer pressure of busyness in our academic communities. The first suggestion I have is to change the conversation. So when people are talking about how busy they are, ask a question that leads away from that. Like, did you do anything fun this weekend? Right? Just something as simple as that can start getting people in the habit of talking about something other than how busy they are. My next suggestion is to find a support network of colleagues and peers who value a little bit of space from work. So one thing we have where I work, for example, is a women's faculty network. And we will often have collective dinners where people get together and talk about like, what kind of life do you want to live? And is it the kind of life where you are working 24/7, or is it something else? And then sharing strategies for how to make space for life in our work schedules. Finding people who want to do that as well can give you a different kind of peer pressure, one that I think we need more of in the academy. Another way to resist peer pressure is to actually schedule your downtime. I think a lot of us are like, for example, I had a really busy work day last Tuesday, and last Wednesday, I just couldn't get a lot done. Rather than just putting on my calendar Wednesday, rest, I thought about how I should be doing something all day long. Terrible use of my time. Gave me a feeling of being busy without the feeling of rest that comes with scheduled downtime. So, in a minute, we'll talk about looking at our calendars and organizing our work life. But one thing I think is a really good idea is to schedule that downtime. Me, I need a lot of time to stare at my phone. I'm over the idea that I shouldn't look at it, but I always feel guilty when I do. But scheduling in time, like this 30 minutes at lunchtime, is set aside for me to zone out. That can be really important and give you a break from that sense of busyness, and also take away the guilt that comes from not working all the time. And then my final suggestion for resisting this peer pressure is to just not work on weekends, which can sound impossible, but I think it is possible. We'll talk about that in a minute. Right, so how do we figure out how busy we actually are and get a real sense of the difference between how much work we have to do and being busy? So I have a couple of questions that I think it's helpful to ask yourself and write out some answers for as you account for your time. Where is your time going? Because the question is, are you as busy as you feel? Next question I'd ask yourself is, where do you think your time is going? So how much of your time, because I think sometimes I'm going to write for that example of I'm going to write for 6 hours today. Well, what do you actually do in that 6 hours? For a lot of us, our writing process involves a lot of checking Twitter, reading a news story, petting the cats, talking to a friend on the phone. And all of that is important, but it is for a lot of us in our writing process to give space in our brains. But thinking about that as part of the busy means that in that 6 hours, we don't recognize the rest as rest. And so all of it feels busy, even though that was a very nice conversation you had on the phone with your sister. So think about where your time is, where you think your time is going. It's all going to writing, and then look at where it's actually going. If what you need to do is get more writing done in that 6 hours, are there a few minutes here and there that you're spending doing other things that you could spend writing? Carve out time, label it, zone out, phone conversation, something like that, and just think of it as a different kind of time. I think that can really help sort of take away that sense of busy all the time. I just remember so many days of writing for 8 hours where I produced one page, and I was exhausted by it, right? So if we can think about how to carve out time schedules, the work can feel more productive while also giving you more downtime. When you're accounting for your time, think about what counts as work to you, because I think this is different for everyone. So in the example I just gave, for some of us, looking at Facebook while we're grading papers is part of our work. So we think of that as as that break, but it's not the same thing as work. So thinking about what slots into your sense of productivity and busyness and what can count as downtime, and just divide for yourself in your brain so that you realize that you have more time than you think. And then, do you have scheduled time to not work at all? And I mean, like, not answering emails, not oh, it's just a quick meeting, but to actually not work. I think this is really, really important. And even if you can't take the whole weekend off, that like I'm suggesting here, you've got to schedule time to not work at all. It is a very rare time in the semester where you can't take one day to not work. And that one day can be really recharging, and it can make getting back to work feel really good. So taking some scheduling time to not work is really important for being less busy. And then finally, make a distinction from yourself between being busy and feeling busy. When I say make that distinction for yourself, it's not just a one-time deal, right? It's a regular practice of checking in with yourself. I feel overwhelmed by work. Okay, look at your list. What do you actually have to do? There's often a real difference between how busy you feel and how busy you actually are. Sometimes that long to-do list has a whole bunch of things that'll just take a second, right? You can check that stuff off. But just the mere existence of those tasks, especially at this time of the semester, if you're watching this live, every one of those tasks can feel like a threat to your time and how busy you feel. But making that distinction is really important, and realizing that the feeling of busyness is almost addictive, right? It makes us feel important, productive. We belong in this profession where the call to productivity is constant. That feeling of busy is not the same thing as actually having too much to do to take the weekend off. So make that distinction for yourself. When you're making these sort of calendars of your time, it's also a good time to stop and reflect on your goals and clarify what you're actually trying to get done. So look at your track time and ask yourself what matters to you, and be really honest about that. One of the best pieces of advice that I got when I started my current job was from another faculty member who said, remember that you don't have to get an A in everything. And we're all A students. That's how we got to get PhDs and to teach and to do our postdocs and stuff. So we're A students who are used to getting A's and everything. But look at your track time. What matters to you? Does everything matter as much, right? Is there a way to take things off your plate by just making them less important? For example, when I started teaching, every semester I redesigned the syllabus from scratch to teach an entirely new class. And that was really useful. Sometimes I look at my calendar for the upcoming semester and I realize I don't have time to do all that. And so I decide I'm not going to get an A by having a brand new class. I'm going to repeat things that I already taught, right? Students aren't going to know, right? Maybe I've got some good lessons that I can transfer from other semesters. So if what matters to you is being a good teacher, right? You can think about how to shape that time so that that you don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. You don't have to be that kind of busy, but you can still be a good teacher. So look at what matters, what really matters to you. And ask yourself, what work are you doing that's more about busyness than meeting your goals? So one problem a lot of us have is saying yes to too many things. This feels especially like a disease that afflicts marginalized groups in academia. We're asked to be the advisor for the student group, to join this committee, to be at this meeting to represent these interests, right? We've got a lot of sort of things. So clarifying your goals, like what is important to me right now in my job, and maybe it's student mentorship. If that's the case, what work am I doing that doesn't meet that goal, right? Or maybe my goal is to get my book proposal finished. What work are you doing that's not meeting that goal? Is it that conference paper because you want to go to Hawaii in November with the American Studies crowd, but you're not really, is that new research that's taking you off track? Like, think about ways that you can combine efforts so that you're not doing work that takes you away from your goals, right? So think about what is just about staying busy. And then also reflect on how much of your work time is spent doing things other than work. To go back to teaching, I find that I will prep for class in however much time I have given myself to prep for class. So if I prep for class on Tuesdays, I can spend 8 hours pretending to prep for class, or I can spend an hour prepping for class on Wednesday morning before I teach, right? The amount of time I spend on it fits into that time I schedule. So if you've scheduled huge blocks of time for something, look at how much of that time you spend doing things that aren't work, and see if you can narrow down that work window, get the work done in that smaller window, and free up some time to do nothing, which is a really important part of working as well. And then ask yourself, what do you want to do with your weekends? Because you're about to get them off. So think about, like, do you want to go hiking? Do you want a home project? Are you into building things? Do you want to pick up woodworking? I made a spoon recently in a woodworking class. It was fantastic, right? Having that extra time lets you have other outlets. So think about what you would do if you actually let yourself take off the weekend. And then protect your weekend. And this I know that I won't talk everybody into this, but I've actually managed to talk my overworking chair into this, so I'm going to try my best with you as well. So again, remember that people have fought for this right to the weekend, and there are good reasons for it. I think sometimes as academics, we're encouraged to see our work not as work. It's not labor, right? It's our own self-actualized intellectual development, and it's about ideas, and we're engaged in it sometimes in a different way. And part of that comes from how much flexibility we have with our time as academics. If you're teaching, say, 3 classes, that's maybe 9 hours a week in the classroom, and the rest of your time is largely your own. And that's a lot to handle for a lot of us, especially when the work never ends. We could be reading and writing and prepping for class and emailing students 24/7, and there'd still be more to do, right? So when there's no limit, we have to insert our own. So choose your own weekend, right? So for me, Saturday and Sunday, it's a great weekend time. My partner's not an academic, so that's the time she has off. We have we have things we do on the weekend. For some of you, your weekend might be Tuesday, right? Even if you start with just one day, right? But choose a weekend of some kind that you're actually going to protect and not fill with work. And please make that at least one full day where you don't work at all. Because remember that work fills the time you give it. So if you give it less time, that doesn't mean you won't get your work done. It just means that you'll be more efficient in that time, and you'll get to actually relax your brain. And that's really important. When you're doing this, especially if it's new for you, it's important to set expectations with students and colleagues that you're going to take weekends off. So for example, I have in my syllabus a statement that says I will respond to email within 24 hours during working hours. So I set with my students, and my students have an expectation that they'll get an immediate reply to email, though they never meet that expectation on the other side. Whatever. So they often will expect those emails, but if you set that expectation and you repeat it regularly, and you let students know that you will respond during work hours, that this is a job, I think it's good for them to understand that you're a worker too, and to have a clear expectation that you're not responding on weekends. I also think it's important to set these expectations with colleagues, especially ones we work closely with. So for example, I was co-editing a book project recently with some colleagues, and they would often want to have big discussions on the weekends, and that's just, I don't do that. So I would just set an expectation with them. I also don't meet after about 6 because that's not working hours for me. So we just would fit the work in to the time when I'm able to work. And that can be difficult, especially if we think about the way that our colleagues sometimes want us to look busy all the time, as busy as they feel. So that is a little bit harder and takes some practice, but it can be done. Just sort of regularly doing your work within work hours and not responding to emails over the weekend is really, really important. It's really hard to do, so be patient with yourself. As I say in this next bullet, believe you can do this, but it takes a lot of practice. It takes an incredible amount of practice for me to not immediately respond to emails when they come in, especially on the weekends or this late time in the semester. I feel like I owe students an immediate response, but I don't, and neither do you. So it's worth practicing, not working. And reserve at least one day for absolutely no work, and it really will become a habit. And you'll find that you can fit all of your work into 5 or 6 days. You don't actually need to work every day of the week. But what if I'm really busy? If I were watching this webinar right now, that's what I'd be thinking. I'd be like, well, Kate, you don't understand how much I have to do. I do, because I have to do all those things too. I teach a 3-3 load. I have research and writing expectations. I do an incredible amount of service. I run a living learning community. I understand what it's like to be really busy. I'm on so many committees. I can't even believe that happened to me. I said, yes, I need to say no more. Okay, so that's about me, but about you. What if I'm really busy? First, I don't think you're as busy as you think you are. I think this really is a habit that we get into of feeling busy all the time. But as I say in this next bullet point, unless you are, sometimes we are that busy, and that's when you need to be flexible. So again, the protecting your weekends is aspirational, right? But we've got to be flexible. I've got, students, student work that really needs to be graded before I go away on a research trip. So I might have to do a little grading over the weekend. So those moments will come up, but those should be the exceptions, not the rule. But be flexible with yourself, of course, when you've got a lot of work to do. That said, protect your free time as much as your work time. I've noticed for me that I can have a nice calendar that's got my gym schedule all worked out and like when I'm going to go for a bike ride or something. And then a colleague wants to meet and all of that protected time goes out the window. Remember, though, as I'm sure you've heard, that no is a complete sentence. You don't need to explain why you can't meet at those times. So if you've got something on your calendar that's not work time and someone wants to put something work related on there, it's okay to say no. They don't have to know that you've actually set aside that time to catch up on, on Project Runway, right? They don't need to know that. But when you've got your own time on your calendar, protect it as much as you protect your work time. It's part of taking yourself as seriously and as important as you take your work. And we're encouraged by institutions not to do that. The institution really wants us to love it back, even though it can never love us. So it's really incumbent on us to protect our time, our free time, as much as we can. And this takes a lot of practice. So practice saying no, practice. For a lot of us, just setting aside an evening a week where we don't work will make a big difference. So use your calendar to schedule in downtime and then honor that. And then resist the siren song of productivity. It's a total trap. We don't need to be as productive as we are. And we can be as productive as we need to be within a short amount of time if we learn to work efficiently and to really protect our downtime. So if you're really busy, go ahead and do that work, but be honest with yourself about how busy you really are. And that will help you and help all of us create a culture in academia where our weekends are just as valued as they are at any other job. Because that's all this is. It's just another job, even if we're made to feel like it's supposed to be something else. So that's today's webinar on busyness, but I wanted to link you to a couple of other resources we have at Ideas on Fire that you might find useful. So we did a webinar last month about avoiding burnout, which is a really terrible side effect of busyness, so that might be helpful. We also have a reading list for academic mental health, and that reading list gives a lot of resources about sort of dealing with stress, anxiety, the kind of things that get us locked into a sense of busy. Also, there's no reason to wait for the weekend to take a break from work. So we've got a link here to some daily self-care practices that you can check out. And then finally, we have a webinar on wellness for academics that has a lot of good advice about how to feed ourselves nourishing food when we're busy, how to get exercise when we're busy, how to get ourselves out to the abundance of nature when we're busy, right? So those are some tips also that might be helpful, especially if you're thinking about, okay, I've got my weekend off, but what do I do with it? So also, if you are not already signed up for our newsletter, please join us to learn about upcoming webinars. So that's today's webinar on academic busyness. Does anyone have any questions or ideas for resisting busyness or concerns that they'd like to chat about? I'll just wait here in case you want to type anything in that box. I'll also say that a sense of busyness is not the property only of academics. I think most folks feel that sense of busyness and get overwhelmed by it. And learning to stay present, to do the task that's on the table right now instead of the task that's 10 tasks ahead, that strategies of mindfulness can help us stay centered and productive when we need to be productive. Gives us extra time. All right, well, on that note, I will sign off for Ideas on Fire today. Hope to see you at our next webinar, and enjoy your weekend. It's a few days away, but it's worth waiting for. All right, bye.